February 19, 1942, 24,000 feet above the Pacific Ocean, west of Oahu, the sky is painfully clear. Second Lieutenant Saburo Tanaka, young pilot of the Mitsubishi A6M0, leans forward in his seat as the wind screams around his canopy. His oxygen mask fogs slightly with every breath. Below him, the Pacific stretches endlessly, an indifferent blue desert. Then he sees them. 4 distant shapes approach from the east, Teki Hikoki. Enemy aircraft. Tanaka shouts into his radio. The formation grows larger, resolving into massive silhouettes with thick wings and blunt noses. They are flying high, higher than most bombers he has encountered before, American bombers, but these are not the fragile aircraft he expected. They are B-17 Flying Fortress bombers. Tanaka banks his Zero sharply, climbing to intercept. 2 other Zeros from his unit swing into position behind him. The rising sun flashes against their wings as they close the distance. Inside the American bomber formation, Staff Sergeant Jack Miller, a tail gunner aboard a B-17 named Lucky Lady, watches the approaching fighters through his gunsight. Bandits at 6 o'clock, he calls over the intercom. The aircraft shudders slightly as the pilot adjusts course. The crew has practiced this scenario dozens of times. They know what is coming. The Zeros dive. Tanaka lines up the bomber's tail in his sights. His finger tightens on the trigger. The 20mm cannon and 7.7mm machine guns roar simultaneously. Bright tracers streak toward the bomber. The rounds slam into the American aircraft's tail. Clang, clang, clang. Tanaka expects to see the bomber erupt into flames. Instead, the bomber keeps flying. Tanaka blinks in disbelief. His shells strike again. He sees sparks and fragments flying from the fuselage, yet the giant aircraft refuses to fall. It barely even changes course. Inside the bomber, Miller feels the impacts through the metal frame, taking hits. He mutters calmly, but he isn't panicking. The B-17 was designed for exactly this moment. Its cockpit and vital systems are protected by armor plating. Its fuel tanks are self-sealing, engineered to close up after being punctured by bullets, and it carries something else Japanese pilots are not used to facing: guns, lots of them. Miller squeezes the trigger of his .50 caliber machine guns. The tail turret erupts in fire. Tanaka suddenly sees the bomber shooting back with terrifying intensity. Streams of heavy machine gun rounds rip through the air. He jerks his Zero sideways just as several rounds snap past his wing. Another B-17 in the formation opens fire, then another. Within seconds, the sky behind the bomber formation becomes a storm of bullets. Tanaka feels his confidence falter. Japanese fighter doctrine had assumed that American bombers would be easy prey, slow, fragile machines protected by little more than thin aluminum skin, but these aircraft are different. They are flying fortresses. One of the Zeros in Tanaka's group presses the attack aggressively, diving closer to the bomber formation. A moment later, the sky flashes. Heavy machine gun fire tears into the fighter's wing. The Zero spirals downward, trailing smoke. Tanaka stares in shock. The bomber formation continues forward, engines droning steadily, as if nothing has happened, even after absorbing dozens of cannon strikes. For the first time since the war began, Tanaka realizes something deeply unsettling. These American bombers are not fragile targets. They are built to survive, and Japanese pilots are about to learn just how difficult they are to destroy. July 10, 1943, 26,000 feet above the Solomon Islands, morning sunlight spills across the Pacific as a formation of American bombers cuts through the sky in perfect symmetry. At the front of the formation flies a B-24 Liberator, its long wings stretching wide against the horizon. Behind it, more bombers follow in tight formation, engines humming in steady rhythm. Inside the cockpit, Captain William Harper, a veteran pilot of the United States Army Air Forces, grips the control yoke and scans the sky. Hold formation, he says calmly over the intercom. The B-24 is on its way to bomb a Japanese supply base on the island of Bougainville. The crew knows they are deep inside hostile territory. Enemy fighters will come, they always do. Far below, on a remote Japanese airstrip carved into the jungle, ground crews scramble as the alarm sounds. Enemy bombers approaching. Within minutes, several Mitsubishi A6M0 fighters roar down the runway, climbing hard into the tropical sky. Among them is Petty Officer First Class Hiroshi Nakamura, a combat pilot who has already fought in dozens of engagements across the Pacific. As Nakamura climbs Toward the bombers, he studies their formation carefully. These aircraft are enormous, and they are flying very close together. Strange formation, he murmurs. Japanese pilots were trained to attack bombers individually, striking quickly before escaping. But these American aircraft move like a single machine. When Nakamura closes within a few hundred meters, he suddenly understands why. Gun barrels protrude from almost every part of the aircraft: nose, dorsal turret, belly turret, tail, waist guns. Every angle is protected. Impossible. Nakamura whispers. The B-24 formation continues forward like a floating fortress. Inside one of the bombers, Sergeant Daniel Ortiz, a waist gunner, peers through the open gun window. Wind tears through the fuselage, rattling the metal structure. Then he sees them, zeros. 3 o'clock high. The bombers tighten their formation. Harper keeps his aircraft steady. The key to survival is simple: stay together, because when bombers fly close enough, their guns overlap, creating deadly crossfire. Nakamura dives toward the nearest bomber. His cannons open fire. Tracers streak toward the aircraft's wing. Rounds strike the fuselage. Metal fragments break loose. But the bomber does not fall. It doesn't even leave formation. Inside the B-24, warning lights flash as a fuel tank is punctured, but the tank seals itself almost instantly. The leak stops. The engineers who designed the bomber had anticipated exactly this kind of damage. Self-sealing fuel tanks, redundant control cables, multiple engines capable of carrying the aircraft home even if several are destroyed. Nakamura circles for another attack. This time he approaches from behind, but the moment he lines up his shot, the bomber's tail turret opens fire. Twin .50 caliber machine guns thunder violently. Heavy rounds tear past Nakamura's canopy. .1 bullet punches through the Zero's wingtip. Another smashes into the engine cowling. Nakamura pulls away instinctively. These bombers are far more dangerous than expected, but what unsettles him most is something else. The bomber he attacked is now riddled with holes. Panels are torn. Smoke trails behind one engine, yet it keeps flying, steady, unbroken. Nakamura circles above the formation, watching in disbelief. He had been told American aircraft were poorly built, soft, inferior, but these bombers appear almost indestructible, and they are only becoming stronger. By 1943, American factories are producing bombers faster than Japan can destroy them, and each new aircraft arriving in the Pacific carries the same terrifying reputation: they can absorb punishment that would destroy almost any other plane in the sky. As Nakamura prepares for another attack run, he cannot shake a troubling thought. If even direct cannon hits cannot bring these bombers down, how are Japanese fighters supposed to stop them? October 14, 1943, 25,000 feet above the western Pacific, east of the Philippines, the sky is thin and bitterly cold. Inside the nose compartment of a B-17 Flying Fortress, Second Lieutenant Harold Green wipes frost from the glass of his Norden bomb sight. The bomber formation stretches across the sky like a migrating flock of steel birds. 4 engines rumble steadily. Below them lies hundreds of miles of open ocean. Over the intercom, the voice of Captain Robert Langford, the aircraft commander, cuts through the noise. Stay sharp. Fighters expected. Green nods silently even though no one can see him. He adjusts the heating element in his gloves and glances at the armor plate bolted behind his seat. The metal slab is thick, heavy, and reassuring. American bomber crews know exactly why it is there. Across the sky, dark specks appear. Japanese fighters. Within minutes the shapes resolve into several Nakajima Ki-43 Hayabusa fighters climbing rapidly toward the bombers. Leading the intercept is Sergeant Kenji Mori, a young pilot flying his Ki-43 for the Imperial Japanese Army Air Service. Mori pushes his aircraft into a steep climb. His Ki-43 is light, fast, and extremely maneuverable, designed for dogfighting. Against most bombers it is more than capable of delivering deadly strikes, but as he closes on the American formation, something about the aircraft troubles him. They look thick, heavy, reinforced. The bombers maintain their tight combat box formation, each aircraft positioned to support the others. Mori selects a target on the edge of the formation and dives. His 12.7 mm machine guns open fire. Bullets streak across the sky and slam into the bomber's fuselage. The impact produces sparks and small bursts of metal fragments. Inside the B-17, Green hears the hits. Ping, ping, ping. The bullets strike the fuselage like stones hitting a steel drum, but they do not penetrate the armored cockpit. Green glances again at the thick steel plate behind his head. That single piece of armor weighs over 60 pounds, and it has already saved many lives. American bombers were designed with lessons learned from early battles in Europe. Engineers had discovered that most aircraft were destroyed not by catastrophic explosions, but by a few lucky hits to critical areas. So they protected those areas. Cockpits, fuel tanks, hydraulic lines, gun turrets, vital systems were surrounded by armor or duplicated entirely. Maury fires again, this time his rounds strike the bomber's wing root. But the bomber barely reacts. He closes the distance further. Suddenly the B-17 erupts with gunfire. From the nose turret, twin .50 caliber machine guns unleash a furious stream of bullets. The rounds are much larger than Maury expected. Heavy American machine guns fire projectiles nearly twice the size of the ammunition carried by many Japanese fighters. Tracers slash through the sky. One round punches through the Ki-43's left wing. Another tears through the fuselage just behind the cockpit. Warning lights flash. Maury pulls away quickly. Heart racing. He circles back at a distance, breathing heavily. The bomber he attacked now shows visible damage, holes. Its fuselage. One engine coughs black smoke, yet it continues flying steadily in formation. Maury stares at the aircraft through his gun sight. It should have fallen. Any Japanese bomber would already be burning or spiraling toward the sea, but the American bomber keeps moving forward like a stubborn machine that refuses to die. Around him, other Japanese fighters are discovering the same thing. Every attack results in a storm of defensive gunfire, and every bomber seems capable of surviving far more damage than expected. For the first time, Maury begins to understand a harsh reality spreading among Japanese pilots across the Pacific. These bombers were not built merely to fly, they were built to survive war, and destroying them would require far more than a few bursts of machine gun fire. November 5, 1943, 23,000 feet above Rabaul, New Britain, cloud shadows drift slowly across the jungle-covered island below. A formation of American bombers approaches the massive Japanese base at Rabaul, one of the most heavily defended strongholds in the Pacific. At the center of the formation flies a battered B-24 Liberator nicknamed Steel Angel. Inside the aircraft's waist gun position, Sergeant Thomas Caldwell braces himself against the freezing wind blasting through the open gun port. He scans the sky through his goggles, then he sees them, fighters coming in. The warning spreads quickly through the bomber. Down below, several Mitsubishi A6M0 fighters climb aggressively toward the formation. Leading one of the attack groups is Lieutenant Masashi Kondo, an experienced pilot of the Imperial Japanese Navy Air Service. Kondo has already engaged American bombers several times this year, and every encounter has left him puzzled. He dives directly toward the bomber formation. His Zero's cannons open fire, tracers streak toward Steel Angel, several rounds slam directly into the bomber's wing where its fuel tanks are stored. Inside the bomber, the impact is immediate. A loud metallic bang echoes through the fuselage, the fuel tank is punctured, gasoline begins leaking. For a split second, Caldwell fears the worst. Fuel leaks in combat usually mean only one thing, fire, but something strange happens. The leak slows, then it stops. Inside the wing, the bomber's self-sealing fuel tank is doing exactly what its designers intended. The tank is built from multiple layers of rubber and treated fabric. When a bullet punctures the tank, gasoline seeps into the surrounding layers, causing the rubber to swell. Within seconds, the hole closes, the fuel tank seals itself. Outside the bomber, Kondo watches carefully. He expects to see flames erupt. Instead, nothing happens. The bomber keeps flying. Kondo frowns inside his oxygen mask. He attacks again. Another burst, more hits on the wing, more sparks, still no fire. Inside Steel Angel, Caldwell hears the impacts but sees no flames. Tanks holding, he shouts. The crew has seen this before. American engineers had discovered early in the war that aircraft fires were one of the leading causes of bomber losses. So they designed tanks that could heal themselves after being hit. It was an innovation that dramatically increased survival rates. Kondo circles for a third attack. Now he aims for the bomber's fuselage. His cannons fire again. But before he can press the attack, Caldwell opens fire with his .50 caliber machine gun. The massive weapon shakes violently in his hands as he sends a stream of heavy rounds toward the Zero. The sky fills with tracers. One bullet slices through the fighter's right wing, another shatters part of the engine cowling. Kondo jerks the control stick sharply. His aircraft rolls away from the bomber formation. For a moment he simply watches the bombers continue forward. Their wings are scarred with bullet holes, panels hang loose. Smoke trails behind one engine, but none of them are falling. Kondo exhales slowly. Something about these American aircraft feels fundamentally different from the planes Japan had faced earlier in the war. They are not fragile, they are resilient, they are designed to absorb damage and keep flying long enough to reach their target, and then somehow make it back home. Across the Pacific, Japanese pilots are beginning to share the same unsettling stories, bombers that should have exploded, but didn't. Fuel tanks that refused to ignite, aircraft that returned to base with entire sections torn apart, stories of bullets that seem to bounce off American bombers, and for many Japanese pilots, those stories are becoming a frightening reality. January 31, 1944, 27,000 feet above Truk Lagoon, Central Pacific. The morning sky over Truk Lagoon is unusually calm, but that calm is about to shatter. Dozens of American bombers roar toward the Japanese base in a massive formation. At their center fly several B-17 Flying Fortress aircraft, each one bristling with gun turrets. Inside one bomber, Technical Sergeant Frank Delaney rotates the top turret slowly, scanning the horizon. He has been flying missions for nearly a year now, and he knows exactly what comes next. Fighters incoming, the radio operator calls out. Moments later, dark shapes appear below the formation. Japanese interceptors climbing fast. Among them are several Nakajima Ki-44 Shoki fighters, designed specifically to combat heavy bombers. In the cockpit of one Ki-44, Lieutenant Daichi Watanabe narrows his eyes as he studies the bomber formation. These are not the lightly defended bombers Japan fought early in the war. These are something else entirely. Each aircraft seems to have guns everywhere: nose turrets, dorsal turrets, ball turrets, waist guns, tail guns. Every angle appears covered. But Watanabe presses the attack anyway. He dives toward the formation. His cannons open fire. Tracers streak toward a bomber on the edge of the formation. Rounds slam into the aircraft's fuselage, but the moment he gets close, the bomber explodes with gunfire. Technical Sergeant Delaney squeezes the triggers of his twin .50 caliber machine guns. The turret vibrates violently as hundreds of rounds pour into the sky. Other bombers open fire at the same time. Within seconds, the bomber formation becomes a wall of bullets. Streams of heavy machine gun fire crisscross the sky, forming overlapping defensive arcs. Watanabe suddenly realizes he has flown into a deadly trap. The closer he gets to one bomber, the more guns from other bombers can fire at him. Crossfire. It is something Japanese pilots had rarely encountered before facing American heavy bomber formations. Delaney tracks one fighter as it approaches from above. Got one diving in. He shouts. He fires a long burst. The heavy rounds tear past the fighter's wing. One bullet punches through the aircraft's fuselage, another strikes near the cockpit. The Japanese fighter veers sharply away. Inside the bomber formation, the noise is deafening. Machine guns hammer constantly. Spent shell casings pour from the aircraft like metallic rain. Despite the chaos, the bombers remain tightly grouped. The strategy is simple but brutally effective. When bombers fly close together, their defensive guns support each other. An attacker approaching one bomber is suddenly exposed to gunfire from 3 or 4 others. Watanabe circles back for another pass, but this time he keeps his distance. He has already seen 2 fighters break off smoking. One is descending toward the ocean, another disappears into the clouds trailing debris. He studies the bombers again. They look slow, heavy, almost vulnerable. But the closer he gets, the more dangerous they become. Each bomber carries up to 13 heavy machine guns, and each gun fires large .50 caliber rounds capable of tearing apart most fighters. Japanese aircraft, built for speed and maneuverability, often lack heavy armor. One well-placed burst can be catastrophic. As Watanabe watches the bombers continue toward their target, a grim realization settles over him. The Americans have built aircraft that are not just bombers. They are flying gunships, floating fortresses, and every month, more of them are arriving in the Pacific. Soon, Japanese pilots will face not just dozens of these aircraft, but hundreds. June 15, 1944, 28,000 feet above the Philippine Sea, the sky over the western Pacific is streaked with high white clouds as another American bombing mission pushes toward Japanese territory. In the cockpit of a heavily scarred B-24 Liberator, Captain Edward Lawson grips the control yoke tightly. the aircraft beneath him, nicknamed Iron Resolve, has already survived several missions. Its aluminum skin is patched in multiple places, each patch tells a story, and today, it may gain a few more enemy fighters climbing. The radio operator warns. Lawson glances toward the horizon. Several dark specks are rising fast, Japanese interceptors. Among them is Warrant Officer Takeshi Arakawa, flying a powerful Kawasaki Ki-61 Hien for the Imperial Japanese Army Air Service. The Ki-61 is different from many earlier Japanese fighters. It is heavier, faster in a dive, better armed. Arakawa believes this aircraft finally gives Japanese pilots a chance against the increasingly tough American bombers that he climbs above the formation and prepares for a high-speed diving attack. Below him, the B-24s hold tight formation, their propellers glitter in the sunlight. Arakawa pushes the nose down, his fighter dives, wind screams across his canopy as the bomber formation grows rapidly larger in his gunsight. He selects a bomber on the outer edge of the formation. It is Iron Resolve. Arakawa fires, his cannons flash. Tracers streak downward and slam directly into the bomber's left wing. Inside the B-24, the aircraft jolts violently. Engine 2 hit, the flight engineer shouts. The engine erupts in smoke, oil sprays across the wing, the propeller begins spinning irregularly. Lawson quickly feathers the propeller to stop it from tearing itself apart. Point 1 engine is gone. Point 3 remain, but the bomber is still flying. Arakawa circles back, determined to finish the job. He dives again. Another burst of cannon fire strikes the bomber's fuselage, metal fragments rip away. A section of the wing trailing edge breaks loose and disappears into the sky. Inside the bomber, Sergeant Luke Bennett, one of the waist gunners, feels the aircraft shudder violently. "Captain, we're losing pieces," he shouts. Lawson's voice remains calm. "Hold your stations." Despite the damage, the B-24 stays in the air. The remaining engines roar harder as they carry the extra load. Arakawa cannot believe what he is seeing. Any normal aircraft should already be falling, but this bomber continues flying forward stubbornly. Even worse for him, the bomber is still fighting back. Bennett swings his .50 caliber machine gun toward the approaching fighter. The moment Arakawa lines up for another attack, Bennett fires. The heavy machine gun thunders. Tracers rip past the Japanese fighter. .1 round punches through the Ki-61's wing, another smashes through part of the engine cowling. Warning gauges flicker inside Arakawa's cockpit. He pulls away quickly. Below him, the bomber limps forward with a dead engine and large sections of damaged wing, but it does not fall. Lawson checks his instruments. .1 engine destroyed, hydraulic pressure fluctuating, multiple holes in the fuselage. Yet the aircraft remains controllable. He exhales slowly. Still flying, he mutters, "Across the Pacific War." Stories like this are becoming common. Bombers returning with engines shot away, aircraft landing with entire tail sections nearly destroyed. Some even come back with hundreds of bullet holes. For Japanese pilots, the experience is deeply frustrating. They hit the bombers again and again, yet the aircraft refuse to die. As Arakawa watches the damaged B-24 slowly disappear toward the horizon, he realizes something unsettling. The Americans are not just building bombers, they are building machines designed to survive the impossible, and every mission proves it. September 12, 1944, 29,000 feet above Formosa, modern-day Taiwan. Thin clouds drift through the upper atmosphere as a large American bomber formation approaches the island. Dozens of B-24 Liberator aircraft fly in disciplined formation, their engines producing a steady thunder that echoes across the sky. Inside one of the bombers, Lieutenant Charles Donovan, the navigator, leans over his charts while the aircraft vibrates gently beneath him. Approaching enemy airspace, he announces over the intercom, "Everyone aboard knows what that means, fighters." But the Japanese defenders waiting below are not the same pilots who fought American bombers 2 years earlier. At an airfield outside Taipei, pilots scramble toward a new generation of interceptors. Among them is Captain Hiroto Matsuda, climbing into the cockpit of a Nakajima Ki-84 Hay-8. The Ki-84 represents Japan's attempt to counter the growing threat of American heavy bombers. Unlike earlier fighters, it carries heavier weapons and a more powerful engine. Matsuda straps in and starts the engine. He has heard the stories, bombers absorbing direct cannon hits, fuel tanks that refuse to ignite, fighters shredded by defensive gunfire. Today he will see the truth himself. Moments later, several Ki-84s roar into the sky. They climb rapidly toward the approaching bombers. At high altitude, Matsuda finally sees them. A massive wall of aircraft. Even from a distance, he can see gun turrets glinting along the bombers' fuselages. Stay fast, he radios to the other pilots. Do not linger. Japanese tactics have changed. Instead of closing in for prolonged attacks, pilots now attempt high-speed slashing passes, diving in quickly, firing, and escaping before the bomber's gunners can respond. Matsuda pushes his fighter into a dive. The Ki-84 accelerates rapidly. Inside the bomber formation, Donovan suddenly hears the gunner shout, "High-speed fighter incoming." The bomber crew braces. Matsuda fires as he streaks past one of the B-24s. His cannons hammer violently. Several rounds strike the bomber's wing root, but the moment he passes through the formation, the sky erupts with gunfire. Multiple bombers fire simultaneously. Tracers streak past Matsuda's canopy from several directions. He barely escapes the storm of .50 caliber machine gun fire. Pulling away, he circles to watch the formation again. The bomber he hit is damaged. Smoke trails faintly behind one engine, yet the aircraft continues flying. Just like the stories, inside the bomber, Donovan hears the crew assessing the damage. Engine running rough but holding. The engineer reports, the aircraft remains in formation. Mission continues. Matsuda exhales slowly. Japanese engineers are trying to improve their fighters. New aircraft like the Ki-84 are faster and better armed. But the problem is not just speed or weapons. It is the bombers themselves. American bombers are built with armor, redundancy, and extraordinary defensive firepower. Even when hit repeatedly, they often manage to complete their missions and return home. And the worst part for Japanese defenders is this: there are simply too many of them. By 1944, American industry is producing bombers in overwhelming numbers. Every loss Japan inflicts is quickly replaced by another aircraft. As Matsuda watches the bomber formation disappear into the distance, he feels a quiet sense of dread, because he understands something many Japanese pilots are now realizing: the sky is slowly filling with aircraft that refuse to fall, and stopping them is becoming nearly impossible. November 27, 1944, 30,000 feet above the Pacific, returning from a bombing mission over the Philippines, the sky is dimming as the sun begins to fall toward the horizon. A battered formation of American bombers limps homeward across the ocean. Several aircraft trail thin streams of smoke. Among them is a heavily damaged B-17 Flying Fortress known as Midnight Bell. Inside the cockpit, Major Robert Hensley carefully adjusts the throttle controls. Two of the bomber's engines are struggling. One has already been shut down. The aircraft shakes constantly as the remaining engines fight to keep it airborne. Behind him, Sergeant Paul Mackenzie, the flight engineer, checks the gauges again. Fuel holding, he reports. Hensley nods silently. That is the only reason they are still in the air. Earlier in the mission, Japanese fighters had riddled the bomber's wings with bullets. Several rounds struck the fuel tanks directly, but the aircraft's self-sealing tanks had done their job once again. Without them, the bomber would have burned long ago. In the waist gun position, Corporal Eddie Ramirez looks through the open gun window at the wing. He whistles quietly. The wing looks like it has been chewed apart. Dozens, maybe hundreds, of bullet holes scatter across the metal surface, yet the wing is still holding together. Hard to believe this bird's still flying, he mutters. Stories like this are becoming legendary across American airfields in the Pacific. Ground crews frequently watch bombers return with damage that seems impossible. Some aircraft land with entire control surfaces missing, others arrive with engines destroyed, fuselage torn open, or tail sections barely attached. One famous photograph from the European theater even shows a B-17 with nearly its entire tail shot away that somehow managed to return safely. These aircraft are not invincible, many are lost, but the number that survive catastrophic damage continues to surprise even their own crews. Far below, several Japanese pilots returning from the day's battle watch the bombers fading toward the horizon. Among them is Lieutenant Masashi Kondo, the Zero pilot who fought American bombers months earlier. From a distance, he can see the damage, smoke, broken panels, scarred wings, yet the bombers keep flying. Kondo exhales slowly inside his oxygen mask. He remembers how many times he has fired into aircraft like these, sometimes dozens of cannon rounds, sometimes more, and still they manage to escape. Japanese intelligence reports now acknowledge something many pilots already know firsthand: American heavy bombers are extraordinarily durable. They carry armor protection. They use redundant control systems, they have self-sealing fuel tanks, and most importantly, they operate in defensive formations that make them extremely dangerous to approach. Kondo watches until the bombers disappear completely. Some of those aircraft are barely holding together, yet they will likely land safely within a few hours. The American crews will climb out, ground mechanics will examine the damage, patches will be applied, engines replaced, and within days, many of those same bombers will be flying again. Ready for another mission, ready to face Japanese fighters once more. For the men trying to shoot them down, it is a frustrating truth: even when they hit these aircraft again and again, the bombers often refuse to fall. February 3, 1945, 31,000 feet above the western Pacific, approaching the Japanese home islands. A vast armada of American bombers moves steadily through the thin winter air. At the center of the formation fly several B-24 Liberator aircraft, their wings casting long shadows across the clouds below. Inside one of them, Captain Daniel Mercer studies the horizon through the cockpit glass. Ahead lies Japan. This mission is different from the earlier raids scattered across the Pacific Islands. Now the bombers are heading directly toward the heart of the empire. The scale of the operation reflects how much the war has changed. Only 3 years earlier, Japanese pilots believed American bombers were fragile machines that could be destroyed quickly with a few well-placed bursts of gunfire. But by 1945, that belief has been shattered. Across the Pacific, American bomber formations have grown larger, stronger, and more difficult to stop. The bombers flying today are supported by long-range escort fighters like the P-51 Mustang, which patrol the skies around the formation. For Japanese defenders, the challenge has become far more dangerous. At an airfield on Kyushu, radar operators detect the incoming bombers. The alarm sounds across the base. Pilots rush toward their aircraft. Among them is Lieutenant Hiroto Matsuda, the Ki-84 pilot who previously fought American bombers over Formosa. He climbs again into his Nakajima Ki-84 Hay-8, but the situation now feels very different. Fuel shortages are severe, replacement aircraft are limited, many experienced pilots have already been lost during years of brutal fighting, yet the bombers continue coming. Within minutes, Matsuda and several other fighters launch into the cold winter sky. As he climbs toward the formation, he sees something that makes his heart sink. There are so many of them, dozens of bombers spread across the horizon, and around them, sleek American fighters circle like protective guardians. When Matsuda finally approaches firing range, he attempts a high-speed pass. His cannons flash, several rounds strike one bomber's wing, but almost instantly, the familiar storm of defensive gunfire erupts. Multiple bombers fire simultaneously. Heavy .50 caliber rounds streak past his cockpit. At the same time, one of the escorting Mustangs dives toward him. Matsuda rolls sharply and escapes. But he cannot stay near the bombers long enough to finish the attack. Below him, the bomber formation continues forward almost undisturbed. This is the new reality of the air war. The bombers are not just durable, they are protected, escorted, produced in overwhelming numbers by the vast industrial power of the United States. For Japanese defenders, shooting down one bomber has become an increasingly difficult task, and even when one falls, many others continue flying. As Matsuda circles helplessly above the formation, he realizes something that has slowly become obvious to many pilots on both sides of the war: the durability of these bombers is not just a technical advantage. It is part of a much larger strategy. One built on industrial strength, engineering innovation, and sheer production capacity. A strategy that is slowly overwhelming Japan's ability to resist. August 10, 1945, 28,000 feet above the Pacific Ocean, returning from Japan, the war is almost over. A formation of American bombers heads east across the endless blue, engines humming in steady rhythm. The aircraft are tired machines now. Many have flown dozens of missions across the Pacific. Among them flies a weathered B-17 Flying Fortress whose aluminum skin is covered in patches and scars from past battles. Inside the cockpit, Captain Robert Hensley watches the horizon quietly. The sky is peaceful today. No fighters. No flak. Just the distant rumble of engines and the long journey home. Behind him, Sergeant Eddie Ramirez, the waist gunner, runs his hand along the inside of the fuselage. His fingers trace one of the many repair plates riveted over old bullet holes. each patch marks a moment when the aircraft nearly died, but didn't. Over the course of the war, American bombers like the B-24 Liberator and the B-17 had gained a reputation among both their crews and their enemies. They were tough, sometimes unbelievably tough. Stories circulated across airfields about bombers returning with engines shot out, control surfaces torn away, or entire sections of fuselage shredded by enemy fire. In Europe and the Pacific alike, mechanics often counted hundreds of bullet holes in aircraft that had somehow made it home. One famous incident involved a B-17 returning with its tail nearly destroyed after a mid-air collision, yet the crew still managed to land safely. For the men who flew them, these aircraft were more than machines, they were lifelines. The combination of armor protection, self-sealing fuel tanks, redundant control systems, and massive defensive armament gave bomber crews something incredibly valuable in war, a fighting chance. But the aircraft were not indestructible. Thousands were lost, many crews never returned. The durability of these bombers did not eliminate danger, it simply improved the odds of survival in a sky filled with guns, fighters, and anti-aircraft fire. For Japanese pilots who faced them, the experience often left a lasting impression. Many remembered the shock of seeing cannon rounds strike an American bomber, only for the aircraft to keep flying. Others recalled the terrifying moment when they approached a formation too closely and were met by a wall of defensive gunfire. To them, these aircraft seemed almost supernatural. Bullets appeared to bounce off them. Fighters attacking from behind suddenly found themselves facing 10 or more heavy machine guns, and even when the bombers were clearly damaged, they often refused to fall. But the truth behind the legend was not magic. It was engineering. American designers had carefully studied combat damage and built aircraft capable of surviving it. They reinforced critical systems, they protected crews with armor, they created fuel tanks that could seal themselves after being punctured, and they armed the aircraft so heavily that attacking them became a deadly gamble. Combined with the enormous industrial capacity of the United States, these innovations helped create a new kind of weapon in the skies. A bomber that could fight its way through enemy defenses, deliver its payload, and, against incredible odds, bring its crew back home. As Hensley's bomber continues east across the Pacific, the crew relaxes slightly. The war that once filled the sky with fighters and gunfire is finally ending. Below them, the ocean glitters peacefully in the afternoon sun, and the scarred bomber, patched and battered from countless missions, keeps flying forward, just as it always has. A reminder of a time when survival in the sky depended not only on courage, but on the remarkable machines that carried men through the storm of war.